Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in The Stream. As The Stream continues to look at Black History Month, today we examine the evolution of the N-word and ask, in using it, have African Americans reclaimed racist language? Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for your live feedback. Malika, a lot of conversation on Twitter today. Everybody seems to want to discuss this topic, but they're all coming at it from different viewpoints. I mean, Some people say you should never use the word. Some people say certain groups can use it under a certain context. What are you seeing?
One of those interesting threads that I'm seeing is this issue of free speech. We asked our community, should anybody be allowed to use the N-word regardless of race? And we got this response from Joseph Peterson on Twitter, who says, everyone should be allowed to, no one should. Hashtag free speech. Now, for those of you at home, you can join the conversation as well, and we want you to. So chime in with the hashtag AJStream.
And remember, you can join the discussion in a number of different ways, including using Facebook. Just go to facebook.com/AJStream and like us.
I am Essence Henderson, a senior biochemistry major at Alcorn State University. I am in the stream. Are you brave enough to join me?
I am brave enough to join her. The N-word has always been associated with the white domination of slavery and discrimination faced by African Americans. That's why for many it just causes a complete firestorm when it's used. In one recent instance, a film critic was speaking with actor Samuel L. Jackson about the excessive use of the word in the film Django Unchained. The interview became incredibly uncomfortable when Jackson insisted the critic actually say the word. Take a look.
There's been a lot of controversy surrounding the usage of the N-word in this movie.
No, nobody, none. The word would be...
Oh, I don't want to say it.
Why not?
I don't like to say it.
Have you ever said it?
No, sir.
Try it.
I don't like to say it.
Try it!
Really? Seriously?
We're not going to have this conversation unless you say it. You want to move on to another question?
Okay, awesome. I don't want to say it.
Come on!
Will you say it?
No, that's not the same thing.
Why do you want me to
They're
say it?
going to bleep it when you say it on your show. Say it!
I can't say it. If I say it, this question it won't make air.
But today, with the influence of hip-hop, some African Americans say it is evolving into a term of endearment used within the community. But the debate rages on, as many fear that the popular use of the word, even in an attempt to alter its meaning, disconnects Black youth from their history. Now, you will notice throughout the course of the program, we are choosing not to use the word itself. Everyone knows what it is, and we feel we don't actually need to say it to get our point across. Now, we have a very special guest with us today to discuss this topic. Joining us from New York is prominent author, academic, and philosopher Dr. Cornel West. He has written 19 books, but is best known for his classic Race Matters, which contains 8 essays that deliver innovative analyses of racial dilemmas in the U.S. It is a pleasure to have you on the stream, Dr. West.
Blessing to be here.
Also with us today is our Google Hangout panel. Akiba Solomon is managing editor of Colorlines.com, an online magazine with articles concerning race and culture. Raquel Cepeda is author of Bird of Paradise, How I Became a Latina. Tim Wise authored the book Dear White America, Letter to a New Minority. And author and social commentator Michael Smith also joins the program. We've got a lot we want to talk about with Dr. West, and our stream contributors want to dive right in. So we found that dictionary.com actually says the, quote, N-word is now probably the most offensive word in English, and that its degree of offensiveness has increased markedly in recent years, although it has been used in a derogatory manner since at least the Revolutionary War. So, Dr. West, set this word up for our international audience, why it causes such problems and is so controversial that it's actually defined now as the most offensive word in English.
Well, I think it has much to do with the fact that the word is associated with terrorizing, traumatizing, and stigmatizing a people, trying to ensure that Black people are so afraid, intimidated, that we will not fight for self-respect and self-determination. It has global implications. Europe niggerized Jewish brothers and sisters. Britain niggerized Irish brothers and sisters. China's niggerizing brothers and sisters in Tibet. The Israeli occupation is niggerizing Palestinian brothers and sisters. Anytime you terrorize, traumatize, and stigmatize a people to create such insult and injury that they're reluctant to want to fight for self-respect and self-determination, you are using the N-word in your actions at the level of institution and structures and at the level of interpersonal relations. And it's a good thing that the N-word is a word that is hated in the English language, and yet, as we shall see, could also be used as terms of endearment by the peoples who themselves have been subjugated.
Well, I want to go straight to our hangout with this next one. There's a Facebook comment from Cami Barlow and Akiba Solomon, managing editor of Color Lines. I'm going to direct this to you. Cami says, a word is only what that generation makes it. Maybe one day the word will eventually mean nothing and racism will not exist. Akiba, can you tell us about the emotional history behind this word? Because it's a loaded word, of course.
I mean, well, the first thing I want to say is that that analysis that she just shared isn't so much about individual emotions, because it assumes that, number one generation acts in a vacuum and that other generations don't actually, that they're not in the room at the same time. I mean, you know, my grandmother, God bless the dead, used the word internally, right? But depending on how it was used, it would really, really bother her. So just out of respect to her, I wouldn't use it in her presence, even though she used it. So the question is, this is an intergenerational issue. We're not talking about, you know, oh, well, we're the new generation, so now we just get to change the history. That just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me.
Tim, do you find that this word is more divisive than other words, say, that are used to degrade minorities?
Well, it is because of the long history of it, and I think that the danger to get into this, you know, question perhaps a little early about whether or not a word that offensive can be reclaimed. I think the danger with that is, you know, reclaiming symbols of oppression and trying to twist their meaning is an interesting thing to try, but it's very difficult when that symbol is still being used in the traditional fashion by the traditional people for the same purposes it was always used for. So it's different, for instance, than when the LGBT community in the early 80s, as a symbol of AIDS awareness, tried to reclaim the upside down pink triangle. That was no longer a symbol being used actively to oppress the community as it had been in Nazi Germany. So you could pick it up. It had been laid down in effect and could be reclaimed. The thing about the N-word, sort of like the swastika, right? Sort of like symbols that are still used for oppression. Trying to reclaim it when the old folks are still using it for the same purpose is considerably more difficult, because the power dynamic behind the word hasn't really changed the way it had, let's say, with the upside down pink triangle.
Well, and as you mentioned, it's a little early in the discussion to get into the reclamation of the word. We do want to get into that a little later on. But before that, I want to talk about the current use of the word in our culture, not just in America, but globally. You know, and as we've mentioned in the show, hip hop has really had a pivotal role in changing the way people use the N-word. There's one song, in fact, where the word is repeated frequently. Rapper Jay-Z has the audience sing along. This means everyone is saying it. We've bleeped it out, but have a listen so you kind of understand the context of what we're talking about. Okay, so if you didn't hear what was being said, he says "jigga my," and then he holds the microphone to the audience, and then they say the N-word. Now here is Jay-Z defending himself against criticism of using the word, saying that the meaning has changed.
Our generation, you know, we took that word and turned it into a term of endearment, because words are, you know, people give words power. If we take words off a network, and that's her choice. If we take words off a network, or we take words off the table, the words are just changed, not the attitude. We have to change the attitude and not the words.
So change the attitude and not the words. Dr. West, does Jay-Z's response justify not only his use of the word, but his actions in getting his audience, most likely of all races, to shout it out?
No, I think in the case of Jay-Z, you know, you're talking about both a lyrical genius on the one hand, and it's a brother who's got a lot of love in his heart. So that if someone actually loves the people, Martin King, Malcolm X, Nina Simone, Fannie Lou Hamer, if they want to use the N-word for me, that's fine, because I know they love me. But the problem is that there's not that many, or there's not enough people who use the word who love the very people who have been terrorized, traumatized, and stigmatized by the powers that be. So I can understand what Brother Jay-Z is saying, but I think we have to be very, very careful and cautious in terms of whether the love is at the center of the use of that word. Now, in that performance, you know, he's talking about himself, and they do love Jay-Z, and he is they Nigga. So the love is still there. As long as the love is in there, that love supreme that Coltrane talked about, you can use any word you want. But we just don't have enough of that love, and therefore I'm suspicious of the use of the word for the most part.
But you're talking also about a very nuanced use of the word between people within the community who understand it and are actually expressing love, and an irresponsible use. And it seems that there is a certain permissibility that comes with the universality of entertainment and music and comedians and artists using this word, which makes it confusing for the masses, particularly a global audience. What do you think about that, Dr. West?
Oh, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's part of the problem, that John Brown, who's a vanilla brother, white brother, he could use the word all he wants. He died for black people. And Eminem is another lyrical genius, vanilla brother, but got a deep love for black people and black culture. But you're right, once it's applied universally, globally, internationally, that you have to be very careful and cautious about it. For the most part, I'm not crazy about reclaiming it, but I do allow for exceptions for those who have deep love for black people.
Well, in this topic of reclaiming it, we got a Facebook comment from Abdurrahman Nagood and Michael Dindell Smith in our Hangout. I'm directing this one to you. Abdurrahman says, a term of endearment? I don't know about that. You never see a mother call her child the N-word. So I want your thoughts on this, reclaiming it to use it as a term of endearment.
I think when it comes to this word, we forget that all words their definition depends on context and relationships. And I think one of the best examples or explanations that I've heard is, I wouldn't call your spouse or your partner honey if you did, but you can, because there's a relationship, there's a bond there that you two understand, and if I were to say it to you, it would come across condescending. So I think we somehow, the N-word has got this special place for us because of the history behind it. But I think we have to understand that it's all about relationships and all about context.
Raquel, so regardless of, the arguments for use of this word by some in the entertainment industry, I want to talk about how this word really represents American culture, because a global audience is being exposed to it.
Well, I come at it from a Caribbean American, specifically Latino American, specifically Dominican American angle. And in my community, it's used borderline gratuitously. But the first time I ever heard the N-word was, actually read the N-word, was in a letter in 1518 from a lawyer in Santo Domingo to describe African slaves in Santo Domingo on the Dominican side of the island. And sometimes what I try to do, because I don't have the social capital that Kanye West has and Jay-Z has, I try to use the word to edutain. So if I see somebody in my neighborhood, which I see almost every day, somebody that I've seen grow up, use the word, I'll stop them and actually try to use it as a connector. What do we have in common with our Black American counterparts here? We have this history that so many of us haven't been taught in school. And I try to use it as a way to, kind of go in and talk to and explore the issues and try to actually connect. Because people in the diaspora, that's what we have in common. We have this, legacy of slavery.
Well, Dr. West, Black Conseco on Twitter has just chimed in. He says, the belief that blacks are the N-word fuels the U.S.'s depraved indifference to black gun violence, to high incarceration rates, to high dropout rates. I'm wondering if it's those topics in specific, among many others, that led you to calling for a moratorium on the word.
Well, I want to do anything that casts a limelight on people who are suffering wherever they are around the world, but especially in the United States, Indian reservations, black people, poor whites, poor brown, poor yellow. But we have to keep in mind that there's something very distinct about the N-word in the United States, because black people in the USA were the only people in the modern world who went from being enslaved to being citizens, and then a quick 12 years we are then re-subjugated with a new form of slavery, and then gained citizenship again over 90 years later. Even given the tremendous struggles of our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean and so forth, they had vicious forms of slavery, but there was no terrorism in the form of Jim and Jane Crow. They may have had certain discriminatory laws, but they didn't have the lynching every 2.5 days for half a century by whites lynching blacks. So that there's something distinctive about the kind of niggerization of black people in the States versus other kinds of niggerizations in the Caribbean, or as I said, Irish versus British, or Jews versus Europe, or Palestinians vis-a-vis Israeli occupation. And we have to be very specific about the kinds of terror and trauma and stigma and the magnificent resistance and fight back.
So do we need, Dr. West, then to just be talking more broadly about those issues rather than spending time so focused on this one word, which seems to be always a subject of controversy and debate and discussion, particularly with the movie Django out right now? Have we narrowed the focus too much and we need to broaden it out?
Is that for me?
That is for you, sir, yes.
No. Oh, that's for me?
Yes.
Oh, I thought it was for the other voices. I mean, no, I think we can talk about this on a number of different levels. I think that we can talk about this on individual level as it relates to various art objects, films, and so forth. We can talk about it historically. We can talk about it structurally in terms of institutions. And I think in the end, people are going to make their choices. Richard Pryor says he wants to use it at a certain moment in his career. Later career, he says no. But the important thing is that he knows that black people have dignity and decency and deserve self-respect and self-determination. And that, for me, is the bottom line.
Akiba, I want your thoughts on this, especially in regards to something that Lisa just brought up. That's our community is asking the same question. Mecca Donna says, why is this even a question for people who are not African Americans? This should never be. It's something for African American people to address. Another one from Dawood Walid, who says, is this even a question to pose to non-black Americans to begin with? My visceral response is no. Akiba?
Well, I think number one, and Raquel touched on this, this isn't a Black American issue per se. This is an issue of diasporic people of African descent who have been enslaved and who have had that word used to describe them, right? And where we lie within a certain power structure. And so I do think that this is something that people who are not necessarily African American can weigh in on. The issue, though, is who has the power and whose words actually stick when you weigh in. If somebody else is given premium over, your words, or they're able to shout you down because they have systemic racism and classism behind them, then maybe they shouldn't discuss it. But the bottom line is it depends on the discussion. Like, this isn't just something where we're just sitting around, chopping it up. But also, I just want to say, sort of in my personal life, I've encountered people, white people, who have used that word, found it incredibly disrespectful, confronted them, and they insisted that, Q-Tip or whoever gave them a right to say it. And my issue with that is, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But there are definitely going to be consequences. So we can debate whether it's okay or not okay or whatever. But as Dr. West said, you're making a choice. And it's my choice to back you up if you do that, if I tell you that it's disrespectful to me.
Well, Raquel, Akiba just said something interesting. She said it's about whose words stick. Now, there's a tweet here from Jose in Fremont who says, a song is an artist, painter. I don't agree with changing any artist's work. If a rapper says it is who they are, then who am I to alter it? Now, Raquel, of course, you went recently to Sierra Leone with a member of the Wu-Tang Clan, and something happened when you went into a club. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I like to address something else first. I think it's more important than that.
Go for it.
I think it's very divisive to say, who can say it, who cannot say it, non-blacks, this, that. At the end of the day, hundreds of years before anybody was saying it in this country, they were saying it in the Caribbean. And I think that we need to see how this affects everybody, because we have more things in common being diasporic than we don't. So that, I feel like, and even at some point we have to discuss how we can use it to connect, because we don't have the social capital that Jay-Z has. Nobody on this panel is going to stop people from saying it. You know what I mean? So why can't we use it to connect people? And then the comment about, the terrorism in the Caribbean versus North America. I read a lot of accounts where it's just as heinous. Maybe, I don't think that we should weigh in who had it worse. It's a word that was used for during the transatlantic slave trade. And the first place that had slaves in the New World, in the Americas, was the Dominican Republic. Therefore, we should discuss, I try to discuss with my own community how this connects us instead of divides us, because I'm not going to stop anybody from saying it.
So, Dr. West, pick up on that a little bit in terms of the context of the word. We know that you are not an advocate of using the word, but does context play a role?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And my dear Caribbean sister has a very important point in terms of the just how heinous white supremacist domination has been in the hemisphere as a whole. And it's not a matter of ever engaging in what Albert Camus calls the algebra of blood. We're not trying to determine who suffered the most and so forth. We're trying to be historically specific about the kinds of terror and the kinds of trauma and the kinds of stigma. And of course, a lot of it has to do with demography and region. If you're in Jamaica, then you had a black majority, even given the vicious treatment of the white elite vis-a-vis that black majority. As opposed to the United States, we've never had a black majority. So when the terror, when the lynching took place, there's a different kind of trauma and different kind of terror, given the fact that you have such small numbers. Those are the kinds of things we need to talk about that do bring us together. In the end, my sister's right. We've got to come up with languages that do bring us together and see where we can courageously and imaginatively and creatively fight what we're up against.
But can you use this word in particular to bring people together? Given its divisive history, is it possible to strip it of those old meanings and use it to bring people together?
You know, I just don't like to impose limitations on the creativity of oppressed people. So I myself find it hard to imagine it, but there's probably some black folk out there to come up with some creative ways of bringing folk together, and that's not. I got to be open for that. You know, I got to be open to that.
Well, Tim, in our Hangout, there's an interesting tweet here from David. He says, I see nothing useful to be gained by white American use of the word. Any word can be used foolishly by any fool. Tim, of course, you're the author of Dear White America, Letter to a New Minority. So our question to you is, can white Americans use the word?
No, absolutely not. I mean, they can, I suppose. You can stand on a soapbox in the middle of Central Park and yell racial slurs at people, but if you do it, it makes you sort of a and so at some level, I think those of us who are white, regardless of how black folks resolve this issue for themselves, and I think some of the folks who tweeted that it's a black issue, I actually agree with that, because ultimately it's black people, be they Afro-Caribbean or be they African-American or continental African, who pay the price for the misuse of the word. So I do think ultimately black folks have to resolve it. In the meantime, however, those of us who are white, I can see no reason constructively for white folks to use it, because that word has never had mixed meaning in our mouth. That is not the word that we used with our black friends when we wanted to go to McDonald's and get a Coke. You know, we didn't say, hey, my N-word, let's go get a burger, right? That was not what we did. Dr. West mentioned John Brown. John Brown, he said, as far as he was concerned, would have the right given his legacy. But, you know, John Brown probably wouldn't have used it precisely because of that. And I analogize it. Let me give you an analogy. You know, I'm from the South, and I don't much like the term redneck because I know it is a class slur against, frankly, my people. But that said, when other white folks like Jeff Foxworthy, the comedian, use that term, even though I don't like it, I don't think he's all that funny, but nonetheless, because he's in the family, so to speak, I cut him a little bit of slack because, as Dr. West said, I know he has love for the people he's talking about. Now, if Jerry Seinfeld does 20 minutes of redneck jokes the way that Jeff Foxworthy does, we might have a problem because he's not in the family. It's that kindergarten or preschool wisdom that I can talk about my mama, but you cannot talk about my mama. And so in that regard, I think white folks should refrain from using this word, regardless of what black folks do and don't do with it. That's for them to decide. It's for us to stay out of it and to fight the larger systemic problems that the term refers to.
Dr. West, we've got about 45 seconds left in the main program. I'd like to give you the last word on this.
Well, let me just say that Tim Weiss is the kind of vanilla brother. He can use any word he wants because he's in the legacy of John Brown. But I appreciate him not using it. That's fine, too. But most importantly, we're trying to keep track of human beings. We're trying to keep track of suffering. And we're trying to make the world a better place. So we got to de-niggerize our way of being in the world, which is humanize our way of being in the world. And that's true in every corner of the globe.
Well said, sir. Our thanks to Dr. Cornel West and everyone in our Google Plus Hangout. Stay with us because they're all going to be back for the post show, which is coming up next at stream.aljazeera.com. Welcome to the Streams Online Post Show. We're still discussing the use and evolution of the N-word. With us are Dr. Cornel West, Michael Smith, Akiba Solomon, Tim Weiss, and Rachel Cepeda. Dr. West, I want to get back to you. You know, this idea of when the word can and cannot be used. Do you set aside academic settings as a place where the word can be used because it is a teaching environment?
Oh, it's a good question. No, I mean, for example, if you're teaching a classic by Mark Twain, who's one of the great anti-racist and anti-imperialists, even given his white supremacist family and upbringing, in Huckleberry Finn, he uses the term over 116 times. You're going to have to come to terms with that term in the text, because the text is a work of art and deserves examination based on what's in the book. So yes, in that academic setting, you're going to have to come to terms with it, I think, wrestle with it.
So there's been talk about making Huck Finn into a movie. What do you do with the words then?
No, I think if it's a serious movie, you're going to have to use the word.
Well, Michael, in our hangout, I want to go to you with this tweet from Kadezo, who says, I would go with what Jay-Z said. It's too late to erase the word now. We just have to change the meaning. Michael, would you agree?
I think, the meaning is going to change, again, depending on relationships and context. But I think everyone, black, white, or whatever, you have to investigate, why do I want to use it? Community building aspect to it. I mean, we talk about using this particular word as hate-filled as it was, but, there's a lot of remnants of slavery that we've used to build community around. I mean, Christianity was used to justify the enslavement of our people. I'm not on the corner trying to make anybody give up Jesus. These are things that we can build community around if we are as black people. But I think also, white people who want to defend their right to use the word have to ask themselves, why do I want to use this word so badly when I know that it offends people? So I think that's the ultimate question everyone has to answer for themselves. Why do I want to use this word? And if you are in the presence of people who are offended by the word, black, white, or whoever, I mean, I don't use the word in front of black people who find it offensive. And with my friends, yes, I use it quite liberally. But again, you have to answer the question, why am I using this word?
Akiba, even in the context of our discussion today and more broadly, it seems like we're always talking about men using or not using this word. I'm wondering what your views are in terms of the use and view of the N-word among the African-American female community.
I mean, it has a lot of nuances to it, similar to what Michael's saying about the context, who's saying it to who and why. And so, I've seen young women on the train, for instance, calling each other my whatever, right? And part of the reason why I think they're doing that is because they're taking on a kind of a male bravado. The idea of people calling Beyonce King B, or Nicki Minaj calling herself king instead of queen. So they're using that, I think, to identify with a certain masculine power. But I mean, that's about intimacy. That's about slang. That's about how words morph and they change. The general question that I have, or the challenge that I think we have still, are the structural issues that undergird why the word makes, is such a big deal in the first place. So we have the interpersonal part, and then we have the structural part that we need to address simultaneously.
And Dr. West, as part of those structural issues that Akiba just mentioned, there's a video comment here about class markers with African Americans using it among themselves. Have a listen to this.
Mr. West, first of all, I'd like to say that I respect and admire you, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are on the use of the N-word as a class marker, where we use it to distinguish ourselves from so-called ignorant people, who in reality are just the victims of poverty, crime, and a society that has failed them. Thank you.
Dr. West?
No, I appreciate the spirit of the question as well as the question itself. Well, one is, I would never want to use a term that would demean and devalue someone or rob them of their potential. All of us have our forms of learnedness. All of us have our forms of stupidity. But we can always transcend our ignorance, transcend our learned ignorance, our unlearned ignorance, or transcend our stupidity, as it were. And so you never want to use any word, let alone the N-word, as a way of demeaning and disrespecting, especially in the sense of robbing people of their potential. That, for me, is the worst thing you could ever do to anybody.
So there is always a conversation, Dr. West, about whether we are entering or possibly in a post-racial society. My guess is most people would say we are not. But if we were, would the use of that word then be acceptable?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, there's no doubt that we wouldn't have a brilliant and charismatic black president, the President Barack Obama, Brother Barack Obama, unless America was less racist than it used to be. There's no doubt about that. To be less racist than we used to be doesn't mean we're post-racial. We still got stop and frisk in New York. We still got the new Jim Crow and vicious forms of racist uses of the law. Not one executive of Wall Street Bank goes to jail, but Jamal gets caught with a crack bag, goes to jail. Juanita gets caught with marijuana and goes to jail. So you can see the racism still within the criminal justice system and so forth. But the fact that we are less racist is something to acknowledge, precisely because of tremendous blood, sweat, and tears and struggle of those in the past to push back white supremacist power.
All right, on that note, we're going to end the program because we're out of time. But again, a huge thanks to Dr. Cornel West and all of our guests joining us via Google Hangout. What a wonderful discussion today. Malika does have a few leads that we're following before we close things out. Malika?
It's the most talked about viral dance fad since Gangnam Style, with tens of thousands of spin-offs and millions of views on YouTube. It's called the Harlem Shake, and as part of the growing sensation, users upload videos of themselves flouncing around to the beats of a New York DJ named Bauer. Now residents of the New York neighborhood after which the dance is named are weighing in.
You know the history of Harlem.
If you're gonna make one of these videos, please do the Harlem Shake, not just waving your arms doing a SpongeBob.
Don't come down here doing that. Don't come down here.
If y'all do that or in Harlem, I promise y'all will get hurt. I'm sorry.
Not from Harlem. Don't do anything that's associated with it.
Don't try to be someone you not. Basically, stick to.
This reaction video by filmmaker Chris McGuire has received more than 500,000 views since it was uploaded on Monday. Well, for more on the dance behind this craze and the critical reaction from Harlem, check out our coverage on stream.aljazeera.com. Next up, Karachi, Pakistan, where a crowdsourced website allows residents to post updates on their neighborhood during times of trouble. With the Halat-O-meter, users report violence or suggest alternate routes in case of roadblocks during street protests, and the map updates in real time. Ravinder says it's a perfect example of how human need can result in an innovation. But others worry the program reinforces a negative image of the city. Tariq tweets, "This app will thrive if Karachi bleeds." Lastly, a tattoo shop in Ontario has pledged to be as resilient as one of its recent clients, in defiance of Facebook's term of service. The shop posted this image of a tattoo commissioned for a woman who had breast cancer. Facebook promptly removed the post. The shop said it was removed due to nudity, and it pledged to repost the picture in honor of its client's struggle with cancer. Well, as always, send us your thoughts on those stories using the hashtag AJStream. Lisa?
All right, on tomorrow's show, a look ahead to the Kenyan elections. Can the country avoid a repeat of the 2000 election? All the violence that killed and displaced thousands. Send us your views on that. And until then, we'll see you online.